It takes about 500 cacao seeds to produce a single pound of chocolate. That's a lot of growing, tending, and harvesting that has to happen to make the global chocolate market happen. As the chocolate industry has grown, it required the creation of massive farms. As these cacao farms grew, some decided to remove the leaves from under the trees to make things easier for harvesting. We all know that many trees have the cycle of growing and shedding their leaves, and therefore forests will have this carpet of leaves. In a farm setting, the carpet of leaves makes things difficult. It made getting around harder. It made getting machinery around harder. So they took the carpet of old leaves away, kind of like a fall cleanup. But then something happened. The yield went down precipitously. Much fewer cacao pods, much fewer seeds. What? That's not good. After some frantic inquiry into why this was the case, a surprising answer arose. The pollinator of the cacao plants is this little midge, this little fly. It was what transferred the pollen from one place to another and which produced the seeds and fruit. Where did they live? In the carpet of leaves underneath the trees. By removing the leaves, a simple and seemingly perfectly reasonable thing to do, they drastically, though quite inadvertently, impacted the entire operation. Remove the leaves, you reduce the flies, and therefore you reduce the cacao you're farming in the first place. In Yellowstone National Park, gray wolves had entirely disappeared. In the 1990s, they were reintroduced to great opposition, actually. But after doing so, an absolutely incredible series of changes happened. Wolves primarily feed on elk in Yellowstone, massive 700-pound creatures. And so immediately, the elk population began to drop. Elk feed on small aspen trees, and so as the elk population decreased, the aspen groves increased in size and new aspen groves emerged. Other smaller trees and shrubs also saw a rebound. The new root systems of these plants firmed up the soil in and around the stream and riverbeds of the forest, which changed how the streams and rivers flowed. It changed the course of water, which then invigorated the beaver population to begin their work of building dams. The reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone unleashed a process called a trophic cascade. One species was added back in, and the entire landscape began to change. By the simple and unintended act of removing old fallen leaves underneath the cacao trees, the life cycle of the cacao trees was impacted. By the simple act of reintroducing the previously indigenous wolves, rivers changed their course. Flies and wolves. Who would have thought, right? We might think that the elimination or suppression of the slave and master biblical metaphor is a simple little thing with no real consequence. We might even take it as a welcome thing because it's uncomfortable. But as we've seen, the removal of little things can have serious impact. When the very first mainstream English translators of the Bible were undertaken in the late 1500s and early 1600s, the translators, as we've seen, removed the slave and master metaphor from the Bible and introduced a much softer and more palatable servant metaphor. What are the unintended consequences of almost 500 years of this on the Christian landscape? What pollinators of authentic biblical spirituality have been removed? What theological streams and rivers have had their courses inadvertently changed? Who knows? But as we reintroduce this biblical species back to the biblical environment, we might see a trophic cascade. Trees growing higher, beavers making dams, and disciples realizing what it might mean to have God as our master.